Hello. So from an early age, I was always curious about my family's ancestry. The natural world was always created a sense of awe to me. The sunsets, the trees, nature in general, always kind of seemed to be a very grounding piece of my soul. And as I talked with my parents more, I realized that we had some Native American ancestry. And once I learned this, it made me want to research that side of my heritage a little bit more. So I'm a drummer and a composer, and while I was a student at VCU in the Jazz Studies program, some of my teachers encouraged me to explore this side of my ancestry to see how it might inform not just my playing, but also my approach to music. So as I started reading some books and listening to Native American music and attending powwows, I started to see how I might be able to use this knowledge to inform my own playing and my own art. And as I was reading the book, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee by Dee Brown, I found myself finishing a chapter and then I would go and sit at the piano and just kind of play a little bit to make sense of what I had just read and try to process it a little bit. And with no real intention, I'd write down a melody that might come and just kind of let it be. And then the next day would be the same. I'd read some, I'd write some, I'd read some, I'd write some. And what started to happen is that this piece of music started to unfold. And I found myself really kind of overwhelmed by the material that I was reading. I was writing, painting, composing, improvising on the drums, and talking to anybody that would listen to me about what it was I was studying. And one thing I started to realize is that as you study history, it's not just a series of events and dates on a timeline. There's a linear quality to the history that we study. So for example, events such as the Sand Creek Massacre or Wounded Knee or the Battle of Little Bighorn, even though they had taken place in the 1800s, were still being felt today by many people. For example, the Sand Creek Massacre that I just mentioned just had the 150th anniversary on November 29th of 2014. And this event happened when around 700 U.S. volunteer soldiers attacked a peaceful village of Cheyenne and Arapaho Indians, killing and mutilating the bodies of nearly 200 villagers, 2/3 of whom were women and children. And I was following along with the protest as this event started, or this anniversary was coming, and there was a lot of anger inside of the Native community about how this was being depicted by the Colorado History Museum, which is where the state that this massacre had taken place. And also there was a petition to have the town of Chivington, Colorado renamed because it was named after the colonel who led the massacre on these villagers. And so these were and are very real events and parts of people's lives that sadly not a lot of us are aware of. So it was then that I started to see a purpose for this music that I was writing. It was to try to do my part to shine a light, not just on the history, but also on the reality that these events have had on people's lives today, and to try to do that with music. So as I would be thinking about an event such as the Sand Creek Massacre, I would sit and try to write a piece of music that could convey the image or the story inside of someone's mind, even though they might not know the actual backstory of what happened. And as I would write these pieces, I wanted to call them by the names of the events that inspired them, so that it was my hope that a listener would hear a song and then look to see what it was called and take a few minutes to do a little bit of research on their own to find out some more information. So for example, if you look up Wounded Knee, let's say, and you read a little bit about it, you can follow a direct path that leads you to the current protest at the Standing Rock Reservation that's happening today in North Dakota. Ultimately, there were 6 songs that ended up being part of this suite that became known as Bury My Heart. They're Broken Treaties, Wounded Knee, Little Crow's War, Bighorn, Sand Creek, and Remembrance. And as we were playing some of this music with my band, one of the guys in the band suggested that I might write something that was not so dark. He said the music was a little too intense and that everything's not that bad. And I have to admit, it was a little bit hard at first because most of the stuff I was reading didn't make me feel very happy. But I continued to read more, and I would go to powwows and I would hear the drums and I would see little kids dressed in traditional clothing. And it made me want to write the last tune of the suite, which is called Remembrance. And at first it might seem like a song that's about remembering all the bad that happened and all the history, which it kind of is. But truthfully and more importantly, it's also about remembering the beauty that exists today with the native culture and the resurgence of tribal identity throughout the country. And also to remember those things, such as the sunset, the stars, the trees, water, and everything that makes us part of this natural world. So I thought that it would be fitting today to close this talk with a performance of that song, Remembrance. And I'd like to invite some of my bandmates out on stage to join me to play this song. Jason Scott on saxophone, Tom Shea on bass, and Toby Whitaker on trombone. And this is Remembrance. You good, Tom? Thank you.